Pregnant wife stumbles upon millionaire husband's secret dinner date with Mistress hidden corner. In the glittering metropolis of Redford Falls, Elizabeth Pennington believed her life was perfect. Married to the charming billionaire Arthur Pennington, she had every luxury at her fingertips. She also carried his child, a precious gift she hoped would strengthen their bond. But one evening, a phone call from a friend changed everything. Mysterious whispers led her to a hidden corner booth in a lavish restaurant where Arthur dined with another woman. In that single, devastating moment, the world Elizabeth cherished began to crumble. As shock and betrayal collided in her heart, she embarked on a journey that would change her life forever. Elizabeth Pennington awoke each morning to sunbeams filtering through silk drapes, the glow reflecting off delicate crystal ornaments on her vanity. She had been raised in an ordinary household and often reminded herself that her life now was nothing short of a fairy tale. Arthur Pennington, a man famed for his sharp business acumen, had swept her off her feet with a whirlwind romance 2 years prior. And now she was pregnant with their first child, a child that symbolized hope, love, and an unspoken promise of a glorious future. Redford Falls was not just a city. It was a testament to elegance and modern allure. Its skyline sparkled against the wide river that ran behind Arthur's corporate headquarters, Pennington Global. Elizabeth adored the city's mix of old charm and new wealth. Glistening skyscrapers rose alongside centuries-old villas, each telling a silent story of perseverance and reinvention. Elizabeth herself had studied art history and found fulfillment in small joys, painting in her studio, visiting local galleries, and curating philanthropic art shows that raised funds for charities. It was at one of these very charity auctions where she'd first met Arthur. Tall, sophisticated, and effortlessly charismatic, he had cast a magnetic pull on her from across the room. Elizabeth could still vividly remember how his hand felt in hers during their first dance, and the look in his eye when he professed his admiration for her dedication to charitable work. Over the months of their courtship, Arthur opened doors to a world Elizabeth had never known: exclusive dinners, lavish yacht parties, high-stakes business galas filled with influential elites. A part of her felt overwhelmed, but mostly she was captivated. It wasn't just the glitz that enthralled her. It was Arthur himself. His contagious laughter, his comforting words of wisdom, his unwavering confidence in his own destiny. When they finally wed in an opulent ceremony at the Carter estate, an ancestral mansion owned by family friends, Harold and Sophia Carter, it was the talk of the city's social circles for months. Elizabeth, draped in a custom-made satin gown, glowed with tears of joy. Arthur, in his perfectly tailored suit, looked every bit the debonair billionaire. Redford Falls, that night, seemed enchanted by their union, as if even the stars above approved. But as the saying goes, not all that glitters is gold. Elizabeth, who believed she had married her very own Prince Charming, would soon learn that illusions, once shattered, leave behind shards of truth that cut deep. Elizabeth's pregnancy had come as a surprise, albeit a joyous one. She had been feeling nauseated during a charity art show, and her friend Charlotte Hastings insisted they visit Dr. Felicity Moore, one of the most discreet and reputable obstetricians in Redford Falls. The test came back positive, and in that moment Elizabeth felt her heart fill with indescribable warmth. She was going to be a mother. A new life was blossoming within her. Arthur's reaction to the news was celebratory but, in a sense, controlled. He displayed happiness, booked a celebratory dinner at the prestigious Amaryllis restaurant, ordered the finest non-alcoholic champagne for Elizabeth, and presented her with a custom-designed diamond necklace. Yet, In the weeks that followed, she noticed small changes in his behavior. It started with an occasional late-night phone call. Elizabeth would wake in the middle of the night and find the bed empty. She'd wander out into the hallway to see Arthur standing near the window, speaking in hushed tones to someone. She'd ask him who it was, and he'd brush it off as a business matter, apologizing for disturbing her. Over time, these midnight calls grew more frequent, and Arthur's explanations became vaguer. Then came the missed dinners. Despite living in the same house, Elizabeth sometimes only caught glimpses of him in the morning as he dashed out the door. He claimed new deals were in progress. Intense negotiations needed his attention, and the current economic climate demanded he be more hands-on in his dealings. Elizabeth tried to be supportive, reminding herself that building an empire demanded sacrifice and that perhaps Arthur was under growing pressure to secure his legacy for the child they were expecting. One evening, though, Elizabeth found a restaurant receipt folded in one of Arthur's suit pockets. It wasn't merely a random slip of paper. The restaurant was Bella Vista, a snug, upscale spot they had never frequented together. The date on the receipt coincided with a night Arthur had claimed he was at a property developers conference out of town. Confused, Elizabeth confronted him, but Arthur's words came swiftly, soothingly. He claimed the property developer insisted on a quieter setting, and Bella Vista offered them the privacy they needed. Elizabeth forced a smile, burying her unease. But doubt is an insidious creature. Once it finds a crack in the mind, it worms its way into every corner, refusing to be silenced. Elizabeth tried to push her reservations aside, reminding herself of her husband's dedication and how caring he could be. She longed to maintain the image of the man who had once asked her, "What is your greatest dream?" and listened with genuine wonder as she spoke about her artistic visions for Redford Falls. Still, the seeds of uncertainty had been planted, and they were beginning to sprout. A few weeks into her second trimester, Elizabeth felt the weight of her husband's mounting absences more than ever. It wasn't just the lonely dinners and silent phone calls. Something intangible had changed in Arthur's eyes. While he still showered her with gifts, limited edition handbags, fresh flowers, artisanal chocolates, there was an invisible distance between them. They occupied the same space, but it felt as though they lived in separate worlds. Her dearest friend, Charlotte Hastings, was the first to notice the shadows under Elizabeth's eyes. "You've been stressing too much," Charlotte said, placing a comforting hand on Elizabeth's shoulder. "You're carrying a baby, you have to take care of yourself." Elizabeth nodded but offered no explanation. It was embarrassing to admit that she suspected her perfect husband of stepping out on her. However, reality reared its head when Charlotte pulled Elizabeth aside at a high society luncheon. Her expression was grave, her tone urgent. Elizabeth, the first, heard something through the grapevine. She began hesitantly. "Arthur was spotted at Le Bijou last week with a young woman, someone who apparently looked far too affectionate." Elizabeth felt her heart twist inside her chest. "Le Bijou?" she repeated, her voice cracking. "He told me he was in Geneva that week, closing a merger deal." Charlotte gave her a sympathetic look. "I'm so sorry, Liz. I'm not trying to upset you, but I had to tell you. I knew you'd want to know." Le Bijou was one of the city's most exclusive restaurants. Tucked in the shadow of a historical building, it catered to aristocrats, old money families, and powerful magnates seeking a discreet experience away from paparazzi. If Arthur had truly been there with another woman, it wasn't a casual affair or business formality. He'd have chosen Le Bijou for a reason: privacy, secrecy, and a lavish environment that set a luxurious stage for romance. That night, Elizabeth wept silently in the bathtub of their mansion, warm water lapping against her skin. She gazed at the shimmering chandelier that hung above her, each crystal teardrop refracting light in such a way that it reminded her of her own tears. How could she confront him with just hearsay and rumors? Yet how could she keep silent if these rumors were true? To preserve her peace of mind, Elizabeth resolved to gather evidence before making any accusations. She also reminded herself that she was not only a wife, but now also an expectant mother. She had to shield her unborn child from stress, from scandal, from heartbreak. Perhaps, she told herself, it was all just malicious gossip. Arthur's success had earned him plenty of rivals who might find pleasure in stirring trouble. Nonetheless, the seed of doubt continued to grow, fed by the constant swirl of rumor and the weight of her own growing suspicions. At around 5 months pregnant, Elizabeth's once defined waistline had softened into a rounded belly. She loved cradling it in her hands each morning, imagining the little life inside responding to her gentle touch. In those moments, she found solace, reminding herself that her child was a blessing worth fighting for. One afternoon, she decided to visit Arthur's office unannounced. Pennington Global sat at the heart of Redford Falls financial district, a towering glass edifice that mirrored the city's skyline. Usually, she would text or call Arthur in advance, but this time she wanted to see him in the middle of his daily routine, perhaps surprising him with lunch from his favorite deli. When she walked into the building's gleaming lobby, heads turned in recognition. Security staff nodded politely. She was greeted with, "Good afternoon, Miss S." Pennington, wherever she went, testaments to Arthur's formidable status and the courtesy extended to his wife. Yet, on the elevator ride up to Arthur's private floor, Elizabeth felt her stomach tense with anxiety. It surprised her to learn from his flustered assistant that Arthur was not in a meeting but had stepped out. "He left about 30 minutes ago, saying he had an important errand," the assistant reported, looking apologetic. He didn't mention another meeting in his calendar. Elizabeth forced a pleasant smile, thanked the assistant, and stepped into Arthur's lavish office. A panoramic window overlooked the city, revealing the sunlit river and bustling streets. There were countless tokens of Arthur's success, framed newspaper articles praising his entrepreneurial brilliance, awards for corporate philanthropy, a display shelf showcasing vintage whiskey bottles from around the world. As Elizabeth trailed her fingertips over the polished mahogany desk, she felt emptiness gnaw at her. The office was a testament to Arthur's presence and control, and yet he was nowhere to be found. It was there, amid the quiet hush of a space designed to honor her husband's every achievement, that an unsettling thought took hold. If Arthur was indeed hiding something as grave as an affair, she had to prepare herself emotionally for the confrontation. Instinct pulled her eyes toward the closed drawer on the left side of his desk. She recalled how Arthur sometimes stashed personal items there. Heart pounding, she reached for the handle. Inside the drawer, she found a black leather-bound planner, one she'd never seen before. Flicking through it, she noticed cryptic initials next to random dates. Some days had a neat GC, and a time, while others listed dinner 8 p.m. with no location. She froze at a specific mention, Bella Vista, 9 p.m., discretion. The date was from a week prior, coinciding with the receipt Elizabeth had found. The initials GC reappeared too many times to be a coincidence. "GC," Elizabeth murmured, her breath catching. Was it a person's name? A code for an associate? A private club? Before she could dig deeper, footsteps echoed in the hallway. She quickly placed the planner back into the drawer, tidied her hair, and moved toward the window. Arthur walked in, looking surprised and slightly uneasy to find her standing in his office. "Elizabeth," he exclaimed, a wide, practiced smile on his face. "I didn't know you were coming." He approached, kissing her cheek with the charm that once melted her heart. She pressed her lips together, forcing a smile. "I wanted to surprise you," she replied, the lie sliding out more easily than she expected. "I thought we could have lunch together." He hesitated for a fraction of a second, then nodded, his smile returning in full force. "I'd love that. Let me just wrap up a quick email." Standing there, Elizabeth felt torn between relief that she'd found a clue and the dread that every suspicion might soon be confirmed. She saw his reflection in the window's glass, noticed the minuscule flicker of worry in his eyes, and wondered if he guessed how close she was to unraveling the truth. That evening, Elizabeth wandered restlessly through the Pennington mansion. She stopped at the grand piano in the living room, running a finger across the ivory keys. Once upon a time, Arthur had played for her, serenading her with gentle melodies that spoke of devotion. Those days felt like a distant memory. Part of her wanted to march into his study and demand answers. "Who is GC? Why are you lying to me?" But her emotions, swirling like a hurricane, told her to tread carefully. It wasn't just their marriage at stake, it was the life of her unborn child. She needed more clarity, something undeniable. The next day, she reached out to a private investigator named Herman Lancaster, a discreet professional who specialized in the affairs of Redford Falls elite. Herman was known for his fair approach and respect for privacy, and she hoped he would handle her case with empathy. They met at an out-of-the-way coffee shop near the outskirts of town, where neither of them would attract notice. Despite her anxiety, Elizabeth managed to explain her concerns without breaking down. Herman listened quietly, nodding occasionally, his eyes carefully scanning her face as though searching for any nuances she might have overlooked. "Miss S. Pennington," he said gently, "I understand how difficult this must be for you. I'll proceed with caution. If your husband is involved in anything illicit, we'll find out. But if it's all speculation, well, you'll have that peace of mind." Elizabeth thanked him, feeling both dread and relief. She was crossing into territory she'd never anticipated: secret investigations and hush-hush meetings. On her way home, she touched her belly protectively. She had always dreamed of providing a stable, loving home for her child. Now, that dream seemed to be morphing into a precarious balancing act between trust and betrayal. Over the next 2 weeks, Herman kept in touch discreetly. He reported that Arthur had been making late visits to Bella Vista and other upscale locations around town, always accompanied by a striking brunette who arrived separately and left quietly. Herman managed to obtain a name: Giselle Chambers. Elizabeth felt her throat tighten as she read Herman's latest email in private. "I have a confirmed identity on GC. Her name is Giselle Chambers, a 28-year-old marketing consultant with ties to several high-profile clients. She's been seen in your husband's company on multiple nights. Based on my observation, it does not appear to be business-related. However, I will gather further evidence." With that confirmation, illusions she desperately tried to preserve collapsed like a house of cards. The heartbreak she'd feared now stood before her, undeniable. Arthur, her husband, her rock, appeared to be entwined with someone else, and he had gone to elaborate lengths to keep it hidden. Yet, heartbreak was only the beginning. Anger stirred inside her, anger that such a betrayal could occur just as they were about to embark on the sacred journey of parenthood. She thought of confrontation. She imagined dramatic showdowns, slamming doors, and tear-filled accusations. But a quieter, more methodical part of her mind insisted she wait. She wanted the full story, the entire scope of the deception. She needed to know if there was more to Giselle Chambers than just a pretty face at clandestine dinners. Time slipped by. Elizabeth tried to maintain her composure, focusing on her health and planning for the baby. Yet, the weight of suspicion pressed heavily on her chest, compressing her breath whenever she was near Arthur. His warmth now felt feigned, his kisses mechanical, his thoughtful gestures overshadowed by guilt. She sensed in his gaze. Finally, the fateful night arrived. Charlotte called Elizabeth in a tremulous voice, explaining that a mutual acquaintance, Anthony Lockwood, had spotted Arthur at the luxurious Le Bijou restaurant with a woman who fit Giselle's description. They were seated in a back corner booth, tucked away from the main dining area, presumably to avoid the prying eyes of Redford Falls' elite. The moment Elizabeth hung up the phone, her heart pounded with a mix of fury and desperation. Something inside her had snapped. She was tired of secrets, half-truths, and politely ignoring the evidence piling up around her. She needed to see it for herself, to witness with her own eyes what was happening between Arthur and Giselle. Despite her shaky hands and pounding heart, Elizabeth summoned the courage to dress quickly. She pulled on a loose-fitting sweater that covered her pregnant belly adequately, slipped into a pair of comfortable flats, and grabbed her car keys. Adrenaline coursed through her, drowning out any second thoughts. The drive to Le Bijou felt surreal. She had visited it before, once at a charity dinner, the second time for a celebratory date with Arthur after a major business deal. The restaurant's facade glowed under the streetlights, a symbol of exclusivity and refinement. Yet, tonight, it took on a menacing aura, as though it were a fortress harboring betrayal within its walls. Elizabeth handed her car to the valet, ignoring his polite greeting. She slipped inside, the hostess smiling professionally. "Good evening, Miss S. Pennington," the hostess said, eyes flickering with recognition. "Do you have a reservation?" Swallowing the lump in her throat, Elizabeth mustered a tight smile. "I'm here to meet my husband," she replied. "He should already be inside." The hostess nodded, motioning toward the main dining room. Elizabeth's gaze swept over the tables, scanning each elegantly dressed couple. The gentle tinkling of piano music and the low hum of conversation amplified the tension surging within her. She hardly noticed the discreet glances from other patrons, who recognized her and whispered behind raised menus. At first, Arthur was nowhere to be seen. Then, near the far corner of the restaurant, in a dimly lit section partitioned by ornate screens, she caught a glimpse of a familiar silhouette. Her pulse thundered. Arthur sat across from a stunning brunette in an emerald green dress. The woman's manicured hand rested lightly on his forearm, a gesture far too intimate for a professional meeting. The softness in both their gazes told Elizabeth everything. She approached quietly, her heart hammering, her breath shallow. She felt both outside her body and painfully present, as though watching a scene from a film and yet living every agonizing second of it. That corner booth was hidden enough to deter most prying eyes, but it did not hide them from Elizabeth's gaze. Arthur glanced up and saw her, his face paled, jaw dropping slightly in panic. The brunette Giselle Chambers turned in confusion, her eyes widening when she recognized Arthur's wife. A pregnant silence, thick with shock, enveloped the three of them. For a moment, Elizabeth could only stand there, tears threatening to spill. She clutched her belly, trying to steady the swirl of emotions inside. A hush seemed to fall over the surrounding tables, with a few curious diners craning their necks to witness the unfolding drama. All at once, Elizabeth found her voice. "Arthur," she said, every syllable trembling with betrayal. "What is this?" Arthur scrambled to his feet, nearly knocking over a wineglass in the process. Giselle looked down, perhaps in shame or perhaps overwhelmed by the confrontation she had unwittingly been a part of. The entire restaurant's attention seemed to zero in on them. Elizabeth could see the myriad emotions flicker across Arthur's face: guilt, fear, concern, desperation. All the confidence, all the swagger he usually carried was obliterated in that moment. He tried to speak, but the words stuck in his throat. Giselle stood as well, looking from Arthur to Elizabeth, her expression torn between remorse and indignation. "Liz, let me explain," Arthur choked out. "It's not what it looks like. Not what it looks like." Elizabeth cut him off, tears burning in her eyes. "Don't insult me, Arthur. I've had enough lies." Giselle opened her mouth, as if to speak, but then closed it again, clearly uncertain how to navigate this confrontation. The tension was thick, pressing in on them from all sides. The faint background music was ironically cheerful, providing a discordant soundtrack to a heartbreak she never thought she'd face. When Arthur tried to reach for Elizabeth's hand, she recoiled, stepping backward protectively. She was painfully aware of her pregnant belly, and something fierce and primal within her longed to shield her unborn child from the turmoil. "Is this what you do while I'm home alone?" Elizabeth asked, voice trembling with rage and sorrow. "Sneak around to hidden corners of restaurants with your mistress?" Arthur looked down, swallowing hard. "Liz, you have to believe me. I didn't plan for any of this to happen. It just..." Elizabeth's blood pounded in her ears. She shook her head, tears slipping down her cheeks. "You promised me a life of honesty and devotion," she managed, her voice cracking. "How can you stand there and say you didn't plan this?" He reached out again, voice fraught with desperation. "I never wanted to hurt you, I swear. It was just... Giselle offered something I couldn't find anywhere else." Giselle flinched. The comment sounded almost heartless, yet she wore a conflicted expression that suggested she wasn't entirely at peace with herself. Elizabeth glared at her, 1,000 questions swirling. Was it purely physical? Were there genuine feelings involved? Did Giselle know Arthur was married? Before she could vocalize her fury, she felt a swirling dizziness in her head, a wave of nausea that accompanied the flooding of tears. Her hand instinctively went to her belly, and the lights of the restaurant seemed to dim around her. The last thing she remembered clearly was Arthur calling her name, his voice tight with fear as he lunged to catch her collapsing form. Elizabeth woke to the whirring of medical equipment. Her eyelids fluttered open, revealing the sterile white ceiling of a hospital room. For an instant, she couldn't recall why she was there. But then, the memories surged back like a stabbing wound. Arthur, Giselle, Le Bijou, the confrontation, the heartbreak. She turned her head and saw Arthur seated by her bedside, head in his hands. Dark circles under his eyes told her he hadn't slept in some time. At the sight of her stirring, he leapt to his feet, relief mingling with apprehension on his face. "Liz, thank God you're awake," he whispered, voice strained. "You fainted at the restaurant." I was so worried. Her first thought was not of him, but of the child. Fear coursed through her veins as she pressed a trembling hand to her stomach. "The baby? Is the baby okay?" she asked, panic in her eyes. Arthur's voice was low with remorse. "Yes, the baby is fine, according to the doctors. They said stress and dehydration likely caused you to faint." Tears of relief escaped her, though the situation remained excruciating. She turned her face away from Arthur, bitterness rising in her throat. She heard him draw a shaky breath. "Liz," he said softly, I need to tell you everything. I didn't want you to find out this way." Her eyes flashed, anger reawakening. "You didn't want me to find out at all, I suspect," she replied icily. He swallowed, glancing down. "I'm sorry. I swear I never meant for any of this to happen. Giselle and we've known each other through business circles. She was an advisor for some marketing campaigns at Pennington Global. One thing led to another at first. It was just flirting, a stupid ego boost. But then it got serious, and I didn't know how to end it." Elizabeth felt as though he'd driven a knife deeper with every word. "You were planning to continue lying to me while I carried your child?" He sank into the chair, burying his face in his hands. "I was a coward. I thought I could manage both worlds. I told myself I loved you, that I'd stay with you, but some part of me was addicted to the thrill. It's not an excuse. I was selfish. I'm the one to blame." Her tears fell freely. She longed to hurl accusations, to scream and demand he leave. Yet part of her was exhausted physically, emotionally, mentally. She turned away, not wanting him to see her vulnerability. Moments later, Dr. Felicity Moore entered the room, professional yet warm. She checked Elizabeth's vitals, her sympathetic gaze acknowledging the tension in the room. "We want to keep you overnight for observation, Elizabeth," she said kindly. "You and the baby need rest." Arthur opened his mouth to speak, but Elizabeth cut in. "I'd prefer it if Arthur left me alone to rest," she said quietly. Dr. Moore nodded with understanding. Arthur opened his mouth to protest, eyes pleading, but she refused to look at him. After a pause, he stood, leaning in as though he might touch her hand, but her stiff posture warned him away. He left the room, a swirl of regret trailing behind him. Alone, Elizabeth closed her eyes. She could still taste the salt of her tears, still feel the ghost of Arthur's betrayal like a fresh wound. She knew she wasn't the only woman in the world to discover her husband's infidelity, but that did nothing to quell the agony. She had to think of the future, of the child she was carrying, of her own self-worth, of the legacy she wanted to pass on. And in that quiet, sterile hospital room, with the hum of machinery as her only company, Elizabeth resolved that she would not let Arthur's betrayal define her or the life of her unborn child. Once discharged from the hospital, Elizabeth insisted on returning to the Pennington mansion, if only to gather her belongings and figure out her next move. Arthur pleaded with her to stay, offering apologies and promises to end the affair, but she couldn't bear to hear his voice. Their mansion, once a symbol of luxurious love, now felt hollow and cold. She locked herself in the guest suite, rather than share the master bedroom with him. Every corridor reminded her of a happier time, a memory that now felt tainted by deception. Charlotte and Herman Lancaster visited her in the days following. Charlotte brought homemade meals, encouraging Elizabeth to eat and rest for the baby's sake. Herman offered to help, reminding her that she had options, legal counsel, supportive resources, whatever she needed. Elizabeth appreciated their presence, clinging to their kindness like a lifeline in a storm. Meanwhile, Arthur tried to make amends. He claimed he had cut off contact with Giselle, but Elizabeth's trust in him had shattered. She needed proof, needed to see genuine contrition rather than simple guilt. She told him she planned to move out, at least temporarily, to gather her thoughts and decide her future on her own terms. The morning Elizabeth was preparing to leave, Arthur approached her, tears glistening in his eyes. She'd never seen him so vulnerable. The man who had built an empire on confidence and willpower now looked like a broken shell. "Liz," he said hoarsely, "please don't go. I can't lose you. You're my wife, the mother of my child. I'll do anything, counseling, therapy, public apology, anything to earn your forgiveness." She held his gaze, pain resonating in every heartbeat. "Arthur, this isn't about a single apology. You betrayed me on the deepest level possible, at the worst time imaginable. I need space. If we have a chance at saving this family, it won't be under the same roof right now." Tears threatened again, but she blinked them away. Her chauffeur, arranged by Charlotte, carried her bags to the waiting car. With a final glance at Arthur, whose face was contorted with regret, Elizabeth left the mansion. Elizabeth found refuge in a cozy apartment near the art district. It belonged to an old friend who had moved abroad for a year, leaving the space vacant. Although far from the splendor of the Pennington mansion, it offered a comforting anonymity and a chance to rediscover herself. In the weeks that followed, she immersed herself in painting, letting her emotions pour onto the canvas. Vibrant colors swirled into chaotic storms. Stark silhouettes represented the confusion and pain she carried inside. Oddly, this creative outpouring became therapeutic, a reminder that she still possessed an identity beyond Arthur's wife. During this period, Arthur respected her boundaries, emailing only to ask about her well-being and the baby's health. She responded politely but tersely, focusing on her medical checkups. Dr. Moore confirmed that the baby was thriving, which gave Elizabeth a renewed sense of purpose and resilience. Then, A month after moving out, Elizabeth received a sudden invitation to a philanthropic art showcase in New York. She hesitated at first, mindful of her pregnancy, but a part of her yearned for a change of scenery, a chance to breathe different air, and perhaps discover a fresh perspective on her life. She accepted the invitation and flew out, trusting Charlotte to accompany her in case of any pregnancy-related emergencies. The trip, though brief, felt like a revelation. She found herself in the company of artists and patrons who barely knew her personal story, so they judged her not for her husband's wealth or scandalous rumors, but for her passion and talent. It was in a small gallery in Soho that she sold 3 of her paintings, each evoking heartbreak and resilience. One collector, a wealthy patron named Margot Lynn, praised Elizabeth's ability to capture raw emotion. "These pieces," she said, "tell a profound story of pain, yet there's hope in them. A kind of silent victory." Silent victory. Elizabeth mulled over those words, tears pricking her eyes. Perhaps that was what she was striving for, not a triumphant public showdown, but a quiet reclaiming of her own identity and happiness. Returning home to Redford Falls, she felt steadier, more certain. She had no illusions that the road ahead would be easy, but she had found a spark of autonomy, an unwavering sense of self-worth. Whether Arthur had truly ended his affair or not, whether he would do the work to mend their broken marriage, she was determined to preserve her dignity and protect her child's future. During those introspective days, she received an unexpected call from Sophia Carter, the matriarch of the influential Carter family and a longtime friend of Arthur's parents. Sophia, who had always looked fondly upon Elizabeth, invited her to tea. The invitation sounded formal, perhaps even laden with subtext. Elizabeth suspected it had something to do with Arthur. Nevertheless, curiosity compelled her to accept. The Carter estate was a sprawling manor on the outskirts of Redford Falls. Surrounded by lush gardens and a private lake, it emanated an aura of old money and aristocratic traditions. Elizabeth arrived on a rainy afternoon, the mansion's stone facade glistening under the stormy sky. A butler greeted her with impeccable manners, guiding her to the drawing room where Sophia waited. Sophia Carter was graceful yet formidable, her posture refined, her grey hair styled in a neat chignon. She rose to greet Elizabeth with a warm hug. "My dear, it's been too long. Please, come sit by the fire. You must be chilly." Elizabeth obliged, sitting in a velvet armchair while a maid poured them fresh lavender tea. She recalled the night of her wedding reception here, the grand halls filled with music and laughter. Arthur by her side in an unbreakable union, or so she had believed. "How are you holding up?" Sophia asked gently, hands folded in her lap. Elizabeth took a moment to answer. "I'm coping," she said at last, "trying to do what's best for myself and the baby." Sophia nodded solemnly. "Arthur's parents have told me everything that happened. I'd suspected something was off when I saw him with that Chambers woman at a gala, but I never imagined it would go so far." Pain flickered in Elizabeth's eyes. "Neither did I." Sophia leaned forward, eyes kind. "I called you here because you need to know there are people who support you like me, Harold, many others in our circle. We're not siding with Arthur in any way, but we believe the two of you can find a path forward if that's what you desire. If not, we'll respect your decision." Elizabeth sipped her tea, letting the warmth spread through her. She was touched by Sophia's concern, yet uncertain of how best to respond. "I appreciate your kindness. I'm just not sure if I can trust him again, and I'm not sure I even want to try." Sophia reached over, gently placing her hand over Elizabeth's. "You have every right to feel that way. But love is complicated, child, and sometimes a moment of weakness, though it can never be justified, does not have to define an entire marriage. I've seen many storms in my life, and I've seen forgiveness bloom in the most unlikely circumstances. But it must be earned. Elizabeth felt tears brimming. "I don't know if I have the strength to forgive," she admitted, voice wavering. "Part of me wants to cut him out forever. Another part feels that I owe it to our child to see if we can rebuild." Sophia nodded. "No one can make that choice for you, but I will say this: Arthur is consumed with guilt. He's been reaching out to many of us, asking how he can fix this. He's changed in ways I haven't seen before. He's humbler, less arrogant. That may mean nothing to you now, but I hope you'll find clarity, whichever path you choose." Elizabeth lingered at the estate for another hour, discussing her future plans, sharing her conflicted emotions. When she left, she felt no immediate resolution, but she did sense a small opening in her heart, a possibility. However faint, that maybe, just maybe, love could endure a betrayal this massive. Yet that hope warred with her indignation, her sense of self-preservation. The weeks rolled by. Elizabeth focused on her health, attending prenatal classes, surrounding herself with friends who reminded her of her worth. She consulted with a lawyer regarding the possibility of separation or divorce, wanting to understand her options fully. The legalities were complex, Arthur's empire was vast, and Elizabeth's unborn child was heir to a considerable fortune. Ensuring the child's future became Elizabeth's foremost priority. During one of her prenatal checkups, Dr. Moore gently suggested that Elizabeth's stress levels were still high. "Your blood pressure is borderline," the doctor warned. "You need to be cautious, Elizabeth. Emotional turmoil can affect the baby." So, Elizabeth decided to meet Arthur in a controlled environment. Dr. Moore's suggestion was to try a couples counseling session, if only to air grievances and find some semblance of peace. Despite her anger, Elizabeth accepted. She understood that unresolved hostility could harm her and the baby, and, for better or worse, Arthur was the baby's father. They arranged to meet at a private counseling center that specialized in high-profile clients. The waiting room was quiet, with soft lighting and comfortable sofas. Elizabeth fidgeted with her hands, her heart in her throat. Arthur arrived, looking nervous and painfully contrite. Their eyes met for a split second before she turned away. The counselor, Miranda Lewis, welcomed them into her office. She was a calm presence, exuding understanding rather than judgment. Elizabeth settled on one couch, Arthur on another, a noticeable space between them. For the first 10 minutes, there was silence. The only sounds were the trickle of a small water fountain in the corner and Elizabeth's anxious breathing. Finally, Arthur spoke. His voice was raw, tears threatening. "I know there's nothing I can say to justify what I did, but, Elizabeth, the first need you to know. I am ashamed, more than words can convey." Elizabeth stared at the plush rug, the counselor's presence giving her enough security to voice her heartbreak. "You put me through a nightmare," she whispered, "while I was pregnant with your child. You humiliated me in front of the entire city when I found you at Le Bijou. How can I ever trust you again?" Arthur cradled his face in his hands. "I can't ask you to trust me right away. But I swear, Giselle is out of my life. I ended it the night you collapsed. I knew I had gone too far." His words hung in the air. Elizabeth searched his face for sincerity. Could someone truly change so quickly? Could a single crisis transform them from betrayer to a repentant figure? Miranda guided them through a series of exercises, prompting them to share memories of happier times, reasons they initially fell in love. Elizabeth felt a bittersweet ache recalling their courtship, their wedding, the fleeting moments of joy when they discovered she was pregnant. Even as the anger simmered, she couldn't deny the love that once filled their union. By the end of the session, they agreed to continue counseling, at least for the sake of co-parenting in the future. Elizabeth refused to move back into the mansion. She still needed her autonomy, but a small, fragile bridge had been built. She left the session emotionally drained, but with a sliver of acceptance that perhaps, while their old relationship had died the night she caught him with Giselle, something new, something stronger could be forged if both of them fought for it. Time inched forward, each counseling session revealing new layers of anguish and reflection. Elizabeth remained in her apartment, but she allowed Arthur to accompany her to a few prenatal appointments. They moved cautiously, like two wounded survivors learning to trust the ground beneath their feet. A month before Elizabeth's due date, she received shocking news. Giselle Chambers was filing a lawsuit against Arthur, claiming damages for breach of a so-called business contract. The rumor mill suggested that Giselle was furious over being cast aside. She alleged that Arthur had promised her substantial compensation to keep the affair private, claiming it was part of a consulting arrangement. Whether or not that was true, the lawsuit threatened to drag Arthur into a public legal scandal. Elizabeth learned of the lawsuit through Herman Lancaster, who still kept tabs on the situation to protect Elizabeth's interests. "It seems Giselle wants to make Arthur squirm," Herman explained. "She's openly threatening to leak details of their affair, possibly even intimate photos, if he doesn't settle quietly." The news rattled Elizabeth. She realized that Giselle's vendetta might not just be aimed at Arthur, but could also impact her and the baby if this turned into a media circus. Tabloids would pounce on the scandal, the pregnant wife, the billionaire husband, the jilted mistress. The mere thought made Elizabeth's stomach churn. Confronting Arthur, she saw a new sincerity in his eyes. He confessed that Giselle had indeed tried to blackmail him, sending cryptic messages and demands. He'd initially tried to pay her off. He was desperate to keep Elizabeth from finding out, but eventually realized he couldn't continue living a lie. Now, Giselle was escalating, determined to exact revenge for being discarded. In a moment of candor, Elizabeth realized that Arthur wasn't just a philanderer, he was also a man in a precarious position, entangled in a web he'd spun himself, but deeply regretted. Part of her wanted to walk away and let him handle the mess alone. Another part, the one that recognized the father of her unborn child, felt a pull of empathy. "I'll cooperate in any legal proceedings to protect our child," Elizabeth told him finally. "But understand, this doesn't mean I forgive you yet." Arthur bowed his head. "I understand. Thank you for even speaking to me about this." In the weeks that followed, legal teams negotiated behind closed doors. Giselle's threats escalated, then fizzled, as Arthur's attorneys countered with defamation lawsuits. Eventually, Giselle agreed to a private settlement, terms undisclosed, but rumored to be significantly less than her initial demand. The tabloids got wind of the tensions, but never secured enough tangible evidence to print a full expose. Throughout this ordeal, Elizabeth watched Arthur grimly handle the crisis. She saw him own his mistakes in front of his lawyers, refusing to deflect blame. He even insisted on personally apologizing to those closest to him, his parents, Sophia Carter and Charlotte, for dragging them into scandal. Perhaps it was a sign of growth, or maybe a final redemption of sorts. Either way, Elizabeth remained guarded but noted the shift in his demeanor. This was not the brazen billionaire who once believed he could get away with anything. This was a humbled man, willing to confront the fallout of his actions. On a cloudy morning, Elizabeth woke with a jolt, a sharp pain coursing through her abdomen. She glanced at the clock, 3:47 a.m. Her breath came in short gasps as another contraction hit her. Panic and excitement blended inside her. The baby was coming. Her hospital bag was already packed. She called Charlotte, who rushed over in minutes. The ride to the hospital felt both interminably long and lightning fast. By the time they arrived, Elizabeth was panting and clutching the car seat, sweat beading on her forehead. "Doctor, More met her in the maternity ward, calm yet efficient. Nurses prepped Elizabeth for delivery, hooking her up to monitors that displayed the baby's heartbeat, a reassuring, steady rhythm. Fear and exhilaration danced inside her. She was about to meet the child who had given her so much reason to keep going, even when her world had collapsed. Arthur arrived soon after. Elizabeth had called him, voice trembling, and while she still felt uncertain about their future, she believed he deserved to witness the birth of their child if he wished. He rushed in, breathless, eyes wide with concern. She could see the swirl of emotions on his face, worry for her well-being, regret for the heartbreak he'd caused, and an undeniable love for the baby about to enter the world. Hours passed in a blur of contractions, labored breathing, encouragement from the medical team, and bursts of pain. Finally, at 10:23 a.m., Elizabeth heard the most precious sound of her life, a baby's first cries. Tears sprang into her eyes, relief and euphoria washing over her. Doctor Moore placed a tiny, wriggling bundle into her arms, and Elizabeth gazed into the face of her son. Arthur stood at her side, tears streaming down his cheeks. He gently stroked the baby's head, careful not to disturb mother or child. In that tender moment, all of life's complexities receded, replaced by a singular, overwhelming awe. Over the following days, Elizabeth remained in the hospital to recover. Friends and family visited, offering flowers and congratulations. The quiet moments when she held her newborn son, whom she named Gabriel, were punctuated by waves of emotion. She felt love so immense, it almost frightened her. She also felt a vague sorrow for the journey that led her here. Arthur spent hours by Gabriel's bassinet, watching him sleep, feeding him under the nurse's guidance, changing his diapers with clumsy devotion. One evening, he approached Elizabeth timidly, as though afraid to disturb her peace. Her eyes met his, and she saw a depth of remorse and devotion that words could not capture. "I understand," he began softly, "if you still need time, or if you can't forgive me. But I want you to know I love you, Elizabeth, and I love Gabriel. If there's any way to fix us, I'm willing to do whatever it takes." She pressed her lips together, tears forming. "I can't just forget what happened, but I see how hard you're trying. For our son's sake, maybe we can take it day by day, counseling, honesty, building trust slowly." His face flooded with relief. "That's all I want. A chance to prove myself worthy of you again." They sat in silence for a while, gazing at their sleeping child, the product of their union. It struck Elizabeth then that life was seldom neat or predictable. It was messy, heartbreakingly painful, and yet held infinite potential for rebirth. If they were to walk this path together, it would be with eyes wide open, acknowledging every scar and striving to heal. And so, the story doesn't end with a dramatic happily ever after. It continues with a promise of cautious reconciliation, a determination to protect what is sacred, and a fervent hope that the future holds more forgiveness than regret. While pain had stained their fairy tale, a fragile new beginning had emerged, one that just might, with time and perseverance, blossom into a different kind of love story altogether. And thus concludes our emotional roller coaster, the story of Elizabeth Pennington, who once believed she lived a perfect dream, only to stumble upon a shocking betrayal. In facing heartbreak head-on during her pregnancy, no less Elizabeth discovered an inner strength she never knew she had. Through the bitter revelations, private investigations, and teary confessions, she emerged not as a victim, but as a fiercely protective mother, determined to safeguard her child's future. Yet, even amid the ruins of trust, a fragile seed of hope was planted. Arthur's journey from arrogant billionaire to remorseful husband suggests that if they both fight for it, a second chance could bloom. Will they rebuild their marriage and find solace in their newborn son's innocent smile? Only time will tell. If this story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Let's spread the word that even in life's darkest corners, hope can shine again.